This is chapter 4 on public opinion. We start with the first question, where do our opinions come from? And there's two categories here listed. The first is what we call on the left is what we call primary group influence. And that includes family, peers, and schools. These are people, primary are people we have face-to-face relationships with. Uh, Peers, I listed friends and coworkers. And then the secondary functions, which are listed from 4 to 10, with the media probably being the most important of those, um, mainly because people spend so much time with media, whether that's television or social media or whatever. People are always on devices and therefore they have a potential to be influenced by what the media is saying. Um, then probably the next one in importance would be number 9, social groups, where whatever groups people belong to, that could be fraternities, sororities, any kind of group, um, that would constitute anything you're close to, any group or group of people that you feel close to, identify with, professional organization, could be anything in that category, um, would be also important. Um, Let me just say a little bit about each of these. The first one, of course, is family. When we're little, we really have no opinions or beliefs or attitudes about what's going on in the world. And we learn that from our family, starting from the time when we were little kids. Our mother and father, first our mother, then our father, then the rest of our family. Then we move on to peers, especially when we're teenagers. And of course, during all that process, we go to school, and teachers and curriculum and the overall culture of the school has an effect on what we think and how we believe. Um, and so those are the most important things in our life that help us form our opinions, like whether we're liberals or conservatives, Democrats or Republicans, whatever we are, um, comes from those kinds of environments, particularly the ones in the first 1 to 3. I remember myself, I'll give you an example. When I was a little kid, my family was very political. My extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, would sit around the table whenever we got together, and there was often a discussion of politics. And they were very much liberals and very much Democrats. And even the time when I was a little kid, we lived in a city that was dominated by the Republicans, but that didn't stop the family from being active as members of the Democratic Party in the town. So what they did was oftentimes they'd pass out literature, and one of the things that they did was they would always have me come along. I was a little kid at the time. I must have been about 5 or 6, and it was a kind of novelty thing where people walking down the street would see this kid passing out political information. Um, they didn't know that the only reason I did it was because I was being bribed at the time or threatened, one or the other. I was offered ice cream at times. Other times, I was offered that I was going to get beat up if I didn't do it. So if you look back on my background, I was for a long time, I'm still a liberal, but for a long time I was a Democrat, and that was part of that background, that family tradition. So that's probably, if you analyze your own life, you can probably figure out where your politics come from. And if you don't, if like you don't have much politics, maybe you're not a Democrat or Republican, or you don't know if you're liberal or conservative, what have you. You probably came from a family that's not political. So, just kind of analyze it and think about it. The other things that are on the page here listed are not as important. For the most part, they have some influence, like religion and social class and geography, where we live, has an effect. For example, in terms of, like, I should probably say something about each of these things. I don't know. Family would be most important. Then by the time we're teenagers, it's our friends. when we kind of move through an independent period where we move away from family. Um, Co-workers, when we're older in life and we get jobs, young adults and whatever, our co-workers, especially if we aspire to be like people higher up in the company or in the business or whatever profession we're involved in, we tend to take on the values and beliefs and attitudes of those people. School, most schools have some kind of political agenda that they're pushing, whether that's grade school or high school or college, and they're trying to influence us in some ways. Probably in college, it's mostly individual teachers espousing their own views, so you probably get a variety of thinking. But overall, there's probably a philosophical bent to the school if you think about it. I don't know, you might think about Lewis and try to think about whether you see your teachers as one group of people that would agree with each other, or there's a wide variety of groups. I mean, wide variety of opinions. Probably it depends. I think it probably depends on what courses you're taking and what department you're looking at. Anyway, all of those things can influence us. And then the secondary groups, as I said, the media was the most important because we spend so much time with television, radio, newspapers to lesser degree. Um, and then these other things, social groups I mentioned, political parties, if you belong to a political party, that can influence you. The culture we're in, certainly the culture has a lot to do with how we think about things. What America's like, it's individualistic, and it's economics is capitalism. All of those kind of things are going to have an effect on what we think about how government works and how it ought to run. So anyway, those are just some of the things that you'll see in how we begin to form our opinion. Just kind of think about them. The second one is what what do the polls tell us about uh, what people know, what the public knows about politics? And I listed a number of here. First of all, we find when polling is being done, and this goes back to the 1940s when polling first started, is a lack of interest in politics. Most people don't care much about politics. They rather avoid it. About the only time for the average citizen paying any attention to politics is during presidential elections. And then it's usually at the end of the presidential elections when they think they have to vote or think they want to vote, they then become interested. So maybe like the last 2 or 3 weeks of a presidential election campaign, do people pay attention? Right now, we're in the pre-primary period of the presidential election, and there's all kinds of candidates. And you can bet your life that the interest on the part of the average American is very, very low, and is paying little or no attention to what's going on. The second thing is the lack of information. Polls have shown over the years, and again, it hasn't changed much. It's always argued that with the change in technology, like with the advent of radio and then television and then computers, that people were going to have an opportunity to be a lot smarter about what's going on, that they would have easy access to information and therefore become more informed. But that has never happened, despite whatever is out there, whatever's happening. Um, it has not made a difference. The third one is little or no content. That is, people don't have opinions on most issues. There isn't a lot of content, even in terms of what issues that people pay attention to. There isn't much you could say about what people think. They usually don't know much. Their level of knowledge and their level of opinions are not very high, particularly things like information about a particular issue. Now, people might know something about the fact that the United States has been engaged in a war in Iraq and engaged in a war in Afghanistan for more than 10 years. But they don't know much about like who we're fighting, why we went there in the first place, whole variety of things along those lines. So the, the level of informational content is low. The next thing is biased. Most people are very biased in terms of information. Like, for example, if you look at all the people that watch Fox News, almost all of those people are going to be conservatives who are looking for reinforcement. And the liberals are usually no different. They're going to look to CNBC or something that they think is more liberal, maybe CNN or whatever they think is more has a more liberal bent to it. Um, and so you seek your bias, whatever your bias is, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, whatever, and you seek to get reinforced. That is, for your opinions to get stronger because you want to hear people who sound like you. Um, there's an old joke that says, the smartest people I know are the people that agree with me. And then the last thing I would say that we know from studying polls about public opinion, and that is that the public is easily manipulated. Um, when the United States, for example, classic example is when the United States goes to war, usually it's presented by the president as the as something that's absolutely necessary because we uh, have no other alternative. There's no way we can negotiate or deal with the enemy because they're lunatics or crazy or terrorists or something that we don't like. Um, Eventually, when the war gets tiring or the war ends for whatever reason, these days it's we get fed up with it and we just decide to go home. Um, then we negotiate with people. So it's kind of insane. And another good example of that would have been after 9/11, we went to war in Iraq. We went to war in Iraq, and the public didn't know much about what was going on. They didn't. Foreign policy is the weakest area of Americans' knowledge. We tend to know a little bit more about what's going on in the country, but we know very little about other countries and what's going on there and what their politics is or anything to that nature. But right after 9/11, we went to war in Iraq, and we went to get Saddam Hussein and get him out of power, and we did all that. Um, but in order to get the public aroused about it, President Bush had to tie Iraq to 9/11, and there was no evidence or any kind of sophisticated understanding by just about anybody who said that Iraq and Saddam Hussein had anything to do with 9/11. But that was what President Bush was selling in order to get the public behind him, and it worked pretty easily. Once you got you had the emotions that followed 9/11, people were ready to get some kind of revenge. That's how America works. Some kind of revenge on somebody. Somebody has to pay for this. And so we go to war with a country that had absolutely nothing to do with it. As a matter of fact, if you looked, you know the politics of Saddam Hussein and you know the politics of bin Laden, they were totally different. But it again, because the public lacks these characteristics I listed here, like information and interest and content, they were easily manipulated. Number three is the question, how are polls taken? Um, the main characteristics of polling is sampling, which means you don't ask everybody. First of all, polling is going around asking people questions to determine what their beliefs, attitudes, and values are. So what do people think about things? That's a part of what public opinion is going to poll, and it could be on anything. It could be on who's your favorite movie star, but we focus here on politics. What do people think about Obamacare, or what do people think about how we're ending the Guantanamo, or how we're ending the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, or how we conducted the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, that kind of thing. Or what do you think of the recent agreement with Iran? Stuff like that. So those are the issues. So the first thing is you sample. That is, you don't ask everybody. You just ask a small group of people, and you're assuming that those small group of people, because they were chosen randomly, which is the second concept listed here, randomization. Since they were um, chosen at random, meaning like you put everybody's, the basic concept of randomization would be you put everybody's name in a hat and you just pick out the appropriate number that would constitute a sample. And if you gave everybody an equal chance of being chosen, that's randomization, an equal chance of being chosen, then the sample is going to reflect what the vast majority thinks. So you don't have to ask everybody, you just need to ask a sample, but that sample has to be chosen randomly. So that's the second characteristics of how polls are taken. The third thing is that the questions in the polls have to be simple and direct. You can't ask complicated questions, you can't use complex words. You have to keep it very simple. The next thing is you have to deal with a simple approach to the issues to enable the public to participate. If you really want the public to be able to answer questions, they got to be sort of yes or no questions. Have to be very, very simple. Here's a video you could click on that'll maybe help you with it. Give it a shot. It's not long, and it covers some of the things I'm talking about here. The fourth question is, what's the role of public opinion in government decision making? I listed three things here to explain the role of the public in policy making. Number one, and you kind of guessed this, that they have no influence on most issues. After all, if people don't have an opinion on what the day-to-day activities of the government are, if it takes them forever to just figure out some simplistic concept of what's going on, they're not going to have an opinion. They're not going to know. And so they're just going to let those issues pass by. Like, for example, one of the things that we've been doing forever is subsidizing farming. We're also subsidizing business in the United States. We talk about, say, a free and open market because the marketplace should rule and all this kind of stuff we say about capitalism. But the reality is we have a policy in place that rewards companies who say go overseas and set up companies in Mexico and other countries wherever they want to do business. And the United States heavily, heavily subsidizes them. Same thing could be said for farmers. Farmers grow the food we eat, and they are subsidized if they have bad weather or the crops just don't grow or what have you, or they grow too much. That's usually the case. Oftentimes they grow too much corn, or they wind up with dairy farmers wind up with too much cheese. The government buys it up and gives it away or throws it away, one or the other. And these people operating the system, the farmers and the business people and everything, are heavily subsidized. They wouldn't be able to get by. The businesses would probably all fall apart. A classic example of this, what I'm talking about, and I shouldn't be talking about it because I'm off on a tangent, but a classic example is bailing out companies, like banks, Chrysler, and all these other companies that are too big to fail. So, the banks or whatever, too big to fail. You lose your job, nobody's going to give a damn. But if the bank fails, wow, the government is right there giving them loans and making sure that they're all, that they're fine. But anyway, most people don't know anything about that and they don't pay much attention to it, and they just buy into all this propaganda about the political system or the economic system being a free and open market. Um, public opinion only lasts on big issues. So they're only going to affect decisions on the big issues that have been around for a long time. So the public is interested in issues that have been around for a long time and are big issues. Like a classic example on the domestic scene would be Social Security. Despite the fact that the Republicans have tried for many years to privatize Social Security, that is, to allow people to, to save their own money for retirement and not have the government do it, privatization of Social Security. The public does not support that. The public supports the Social Security system as it exists. And so it's really anybody who gets in power, no matter what they said before that, is going to support Social Security. They may change it to some degree, less benefits or whatever, but they are committed. They become committed to it because the public wouldn't stand for complete privatization of Social Security. Um, when it's wartime, when you look at wars like Afghanistan or you look at Iraq, um, the public after a time, first they'll support it. There'll be strong support because there's what's called rally around the flag, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about the presidency. But there's this notion that um, the war is justifiable. Then after a time, we see what happens in these limited wars that we're involved in these days, like what really went on in Afghanistan or what really went on in Iraq. There's all this corruption and us trying to buy friends with millions of dollars in cash handed out to all kinds of warlords and people who are essentially living in the 14th century, and we're trying to bring them up to the 21st century. And it looks like it's a chaotic mess, which more or less it is. So then the public changes its mind and says we want to get out, but they don't give the public officials much more information than that. First, it's support, then we want to get out, but they don't say, like how long you have to get out before we kick you out of office, how long do we have to get out of the war, how many troops can we leave there, all that kind of stuff. That's the specifics they don't handle. About all they can do is the third thing is provide a context or a direction to policy, meaning to say, like with the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, get out. We support leaving that country and stop spending our money there, much as we said about Vietnam. But it doesn't explain like how many troops you can leave in there, how much political influence can you still have, can can you still do drone war there, even though you can't do soldiers on the ground anymore? All those kind of specifics that they don't answer, don't help. So that's the extent of public opinion. It isn't much, I would say in general, it isn't much. The opinion is, and it's only on some issues, and it only provides direction. Here's a couple examples of what I was talking about earlier, um, that issues have to be simple. This is the one about immigration. What should our immigration policy be? Should it be stronger border security or um, and less status for immigrants? What's the status of immigrants? You have to keep it really, really simple. So 51% say we should have more border security, and 45% think the status of immigrants is good. So that's the kind of thing. Here's one more thing I would add, and that is you got three choices with almost every question: yes or no or don't know. And the don't know category um, over here, this don't know, is oftentimes really bigger than anything else. And so you got to be really careful when you interpret the polls and questions, because if the don't know is bigger than the yes or no, then then it doesn't really mean anything, and it's subject to a lot of change, which is a characteristic of public opinion. It changes, and it changes fast, and that's because people don't, um, they don't hold to the opinion because it doesn't have substance to them. It's like asking them what brand of toothpaste do you prefer. Nobody really is committed to a brand of toothpaste, so that's likely to change depending on what's on sale. So anyway, that gave you some idea of what's going on in terms of public opinion. I hope it was helpful.